Welcome to Rich Conversations. Today I'm joined by Remington Tonar. Something I've been thinking about lately is the future of capitalism. With the pandemic and the surge of energy coming from the Black Lives Matter movement, what does the system look like in America's future? How can we work together to create something better that reflects our shared values? I want to better educate myself. Remington and I go way back, and he's an awesome person to talk to about this. He's now the chief revenue officer at the largest startup community in Texas called The Cannon. You can follow him at Remington Tonar. All right, so something that's been on my mind recently is the future of capitalism. And I thought, who best to talk to than Rem Tonar? And here we have Rem Tonar, all the way from Houston. Why don't you introduce yourself a little bit?
Sure. Thanks, Rich. So Remington Tonar here. I'm currently the chief revenue officer at a company called The Cannon. The Cannon is the largest startup community in Texas and the largest shared workspace provider in Houston. We operate over 200,000 square feet of co-working and incubator space, and we provide services to startups, investors, companies and governments, established companies and governments, to help them catalyze innovation within their organizations, within their cities or counties. And we also have an investor network. And a lot of my background has been in corporate innovation, corporate growth strategy consulting, as well as in venture capital and venture capital fund management. So I have a broad kind of understanding of capitalism from the perspective of both large corporations, many of which I worked with as a consultant, but then also from the investment side of the equation and from the entrepreneurial side of the equation.
Awesome. Okay, so capitalism has been on my mind recently, especially with the COVID-19 situation going on, and then you have police brutality and Black Lives Matter movement really gaining some steam, and it feels like there's a change coming in the country somewhere somehow, and I'm just thinking about like what does it look like in the future, and if you could give a summary of like what is capitalism?
Yeah. So, well, that's an excellent question. And I would say that the definition of capitalism is not uncontroversial. And capitalism is often used as a synonym for the free market or a free market economy, which historically it was a pretty safe. It was pretty safe to interchange those terms, capitalism and a free market economy, but today it's probably not. But initially, the idea of capitalism as a macroeconomic system, as a system of economics that allows us to exchange value in a way that's kind of mediated by a specific set of rules. Capitalism was designed to favor the input of kind of capital machinery initially, or assets or resources, or even labor, which is an asset or a factor of production. And the term factor of production is a classical economics term that was used by Adam Smith, among others. But all of these factors of production were input into the system, and then from those factors you were able to extract value out of the system. And then, the free market element of that is that the goods or products or services that emerge from that system are able to be exchanged freely, using the medium of money. And money, a lot of people don't realize this or never really think about it, but money is an entirely social construct. It's entirely made up. There's absolutely there's no
People
value.
have a hard time.
People are like, what do you mean it's made up? I've been working my whole life to make money, and you're telling me it's just it's a made up construct. Well, yes, it is. If you think of a dollar bill, for example, it's worthless. It's cotton. And the copper in an old copper penny is worth more than a penny now. So the idea of money is made up. Now most money is transacted digitally and electronically, right? So no one uses paper money or coinage anymore. But the reason we have money in a market system, in a market economy, is because if I grew cattle, if I raised cattle, Rich, and you baked bread, and we were in a barter system, and you wanted just, a slice of beef. Well, how do I know how much your bread is worth? Or maybe you want a whole cow, but now in order to get a whole cow, to buy a whole cow, you're going to have to make bread for a year just for me to
Yeah.
buy my whole cow, right?
Exchange.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Well, that doesn't make any sense. So money became a medium. Money has always been a medium of exchange. It allows us to fractionalize the value of things so that we can buy anything we want without having to barter or negotiate in ways that sometimes are totally impractical, like the bread
Yeah.
cattle example. So that's why we have money, and it only has value because we place value on it. Now, money is an important instrument in a free market economy, and in capitalism, broadly speaking, the types of capital that capitalism was built on had nothing to do with money. They were really more about those factors of production that I was talking about. But now, today, fast forward. Sorry, go ahead.
You're picking up right where like Adam Smith comes in, but
Yes.
capitalism kind of goes even deeper than that. Like the 1300s, or even before the 1300s, it was like Asian countries, and that whole, I'm looking at a map right now, like the east coast of Africa, India, Asia, they were all trading amongst each other.
Yes. So trade, but
Yeah.
trading and trade is not the primary feature of capitalism. The primary feature of capitalism is a system that rewards certain inputs in a private in a private setting, right?
So then it's like, so then,
So most of the trade, think
yeah.
about this. Most of the trade pre-Adam Smith, right, before the 18th century, the vast majority of trade was government sponsored, right? And the vast majority of explorations these expeditions sent out, like Columbus, for example, most of those were government sponsored because the governments were really the only groups that had enough capital or money to be able to fund those expeditions. So there's a lot more government sponsorship of things, government control most of the system. So you have like mercantilism, which is a prior system, feudalism, which is a prior system, where you have landowners that really control the economy, or the government or the emperor or the king controls the economy, which is how it was really before capitalism. So in capitalism, though, what happens is you have the entrance of private
Brett,
ownership.
you don't have to talk so fast.
This is how I talk. You know that. That's really funny. Here in Texas, and you'll appreciate this, Rich. Here in Texas, and for your listeners and viewers, I spent, I kind of cut my teeth in New York, and then became a fast-talking, suit-wearing New Yorker. But here in Texas, I talk 3 or 4 times faster than the average business professional here. They'd still be back on introducing themselves if they're on this call. But the
joint stock companies come about, right?
Yeah, well, before stock, you have to establish a mechanism for private ownership, right? And that's what kind of the modern system of capitalism really does. It creates a mechanism whereby the private ownership of assets, right, can be rewarded for the value that those capital assets create, right? So the difference was you had labor before capitalism. You had labor, you had money, you had land. But a lot of those things weren't privately owned, and private owners in many cases weren't allowed to take those factors of production and use them to create value for themselves or their family or their employees.
They have to go through like the government of whoever.
Yeah, the
was in
government or the kingdom, or whatever wealthy landlord or feudalistic lord the king appointed to oversee that land, right?
Okay.
So the entrance of private ownership is really important in the evolution of capitalism, is really one of the things that demarcates capitalism, modern capitalism, from the systems of economics that preceded it. And John Locke, in his second treatise on government, talks about this idea of ownership and what it means to own something, and that wasn't that long ago, right? So this idea of private ownership, and that people can own factors of production that they use to create value, and that value belongs to them, is something that is relatively modern.
Who would you say, who are the biggest names of capitalism and like the thinkers that have influenced what we know as capitalism today?
Well, certainly Adam Smith, obviously, who is
So this is
generally.
Wealth of Nations.
This is The Wealth of Nations, which was published in a very conspicuous year, 1776. And a lot of people think that the most important thing that happened in 1776 was the signing of the Declaration of Independence.
Uh-huh.
But one could argue that, in fact, it was actually the publication of The Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith. And Adam Smith today is generally regarded as the father of modern capitalism, because in The Wealth of Nations, he kind of lays out this idea that people, should be able to work for themselves, right, and create value for themselves, and use their land and their labor to create value for themselves, not some king or your feudal landowner. And that at the time was a pretty revolutionary idea.
So I've been on this reading binge, and I'll check out like 50 books at a time from the library. And I remember so I haven't read Wealth of Nations yet.
Most of it's really boring. Like most of it's
that's
like
what I
just
figured.
like,
It's like 18th century literature. Oh man, this is gonna kill me. It's so thick and intimidating. And then so I have like 50 books at a time. Just it's kind of like music of like what mood am I feeling? And I take that book and I have them all on hand so I can be selective. And then I've also checked out Communist Manifesto by Karl Marx.
Yep.
And I mean, who's probably like, would you say the opposite or of Adam Smith or?
Yeah, I think, I mean, perhaps, I mean, they weren't contemporaries really, but, Marx is, most people would say that Karl Marx was or is the kind of other pole to Adam Smith. What's really wild is I think that history has been very kind to Marx. And eventually, Rich will talk about capitalism today and its discontents, but Karl Marx has been proven in many ways correct or vindicated by history. And I say that as a capitalist. Many of the predictions Marx made and observations Marx made at the time, principally in like Das Kapital, which is his, kind of massive original tome, have proven to be more or less correct, or at least correct enough where even the most ardent capitalist, like Smithian capitalist, has to admit that Marx has merit. And during the Reagan era, Karl Marx was kind of public enemy or historical enemy number one, right? And it's like, socialism is this evil empire. And, of course, at the time during the Cold War, that made a lot of sense. But objectively speaking, the principles that socialism is founded upon, are rooted in valid Marxian critiques of capitalism. And most people, most capitalists and most Republicans like myself are not willing to admit that. But, I am. And I think that, we'll continue to see Marx's influence kind of grow or make a resurgence in the coming decade.
The central idea of capitalism is really efficiency, maybe, right?
Well, I think the central idea of, and we need to demarcate kind of historical capitalism or capitalism, kind of classical capitalism versus contemporary capitalism, let's say, right?
So capitalism is this like engine, this like system.
It's a system. It's an economic system.
It's kind of changed throughout time.
It's absolutely changed. Yeah. It's changed dramatically, in fact, right? I mean, originally it was just all about, individuals and private companies. Private individuals and private companies own the factors of production versus the government owning the factors of production, which are those inputs, those kind of input assets I talked about, right? That was how capitalism was originally conceived. Fast forward. Today, that's not what capitalism means at all. So what you're talking about with efficiency, capitalism did go through a period when it is applied on
industrial capitalism.
Industrial capitalism, right. So but this is, post-Smith, right? So what I was talking about was like capitalism as it was originally conceived, Wealth of Nations, late 18th century, 1776, those people are dead. And frankly, that style of capitalism is dead as well. So fast forward, the first industrial revolution, right? And then, subsequent industrial revolutions take capitalism, that idea of capitalism, and apply it from a macroeconomic perspective into the microeconomic perspective, right? Which is to say it gets applied at the firm level or the level of companies. And of course, the company's goal in this capitalist system is now profit. It is now, because they control the factors of production, they can now generate profits for themselves, right? Now, here's the thing. Nothing in capitalism necessarily indicates that the profits that you generate as a private individual, you have to keep for yourself. Right.
Yeah.
So capitalism inherently isn't about greed. It's just about private people owning their own destiny, essentially. But you can do whatever you want with that destiny. If you want to make all this money as a private company or private individual and turn around and just shell it out to anybody who needs it, it is your right within capitalism to do that. Right. So I think one of the big questions people want to ask really is, when did capitalism start equaling greed? Right.
Yeah. Would you say, is it the industrial age of like?
No, I actually think it. Yes. I mean, I think, but not because of industrialization, right? I mean, I think what happens.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think
like,
you see it.
It's the people.
It's the people.
It's
you see it with the robber barons. But let me just like cut to the chase here. It's not really industrialization or like companies that cause this to happen. Okay. It is capital markets. It is securities. The rise of the ability to invest capital into things passively, right?
Okay.
And then extract value from those things is what has created the capitalism we know today. So, for example, if you were an entrepreneur early on in the days of capitalism, you would work your ass off. Can I say that on your show? Is that allowed?
Yeah.
Okay.
Good.
So Rich, you know that. Yeah. Well, Rich, you know that. I have a podcast with a buddy of mine down here, Keith, who's a fantastic attorney, and we try to keep our podcast PG-13. So
yeah,
but good. I'm glad this is R-rated, and I'm sure at some point you'll get into the X-rated thing because that's really hot now. That's basically what TikTok is, right? It shows you how out of touch I am with social media today. But so the ability to then invest capital into a marketplace in securities that allow you to passively earn income is what changes everything, I think. And so if you're an entrepreneur in the classic definition of, here's why. Because if you're an entrepreneur, you're working your ass off to make your company work, right?
Right.
And you're hiring employees to make your company work. And you're creating value for customers or consumers to make your company work. So that's how capitalism is supposed to work. You're working your butt off. You're creating value for yourself and others. Okay. Now, historically, what would happen is you would get this value. You'd get the profits from your hard work, and then you would either distribute, give your employees raises, or invest in the growth of your company so that you can hire more people. And you'll keep some of it and you'll build a bigger house, but that'll hire people through construction, right? You'll get construction workers and architects, and the people who make the building materials will have jobs. That's how capitalism is supposed to work. And this is where that notion of trickle down economics comes in, which is to say the idea is that, the money you earn, you put back into the economy. That at some point we created mechanisms so that didn't have to happen. Okay.
That's a concept from like 1400s where like the most godly thing was to like be very like minimal with your money, and any surplus you got you put back into your business. And that was totally. Like the godly thing is to live minimally instead of like aristocracy where everything was like appointed.
So a couple things happened though over the course of history. Just a couple. As it pertains to the evolution of capitalism, there are actually just a couple that I think have outsized or disproportionately large impact on what we see from capitalism today. One is the privatization of debt. So debt goes back thousands of years. Debt is an old instrument, okay? But most debt was controlled by governments. And then eventually debt comes to be controlled by churches. This is why, the churches were always really of all religions were always really wealthy because, they were also the banks. That's handy. So you take the tithes from your parishioners or your followers, and then you lend that money back to them for interest.
Yeah.
It's a great racket. So banking and debt right, was controlled by the government. Then it was controlled by churches. But then at some point you get private bankers, J.P. Morgan, Merrill Lynch, these guys, right?
Yeah.
And the private bankers start their own banks and start doing lending. And they're able to make money on that debt without doing anything. Okay.
Yeah.
I can issue you a loan and I can make money on your work and I have to do zero, right? Now, here's the thing. The debt still helped and it still was part of this kind of old school capitalism because then I would loan to you and then that money would allow you to go and create more jobs, okay? So, but debt seeded the path for what most people know as like the stock market, but I'm going to say securities broadly speaking, and a security in this context, is just an instrument that you can invest in, right? And securities change everything, because with the securities markets,
like your shareholders, right?
Exactly.
Going
exactly.
public.
This is your shareholders. This is having people own a share of your company, right? So at first, this makes sense because I need to raise money for expansion. And I want to sell pieces of my company to other people, maybe my employees, to help fund that expansion. Okay, that's cool. But then what happens is what we call the secondary markets emerge. And a secondary market is what we know today as the New York Stock Exchange or the NASDAQ or the FTSE or any of the other major stock exchanges worldwide. So on a stock exchange, what you're buying, that share of like Apple stock you're buying, you're not buying that from Apple.
You're buying that from, are they on the NASDAQ or or New York Stock Exchange?
I think Apple's NASDAQ, but most tech companies are NASDAQ. But there are a few large tech companies now that are on the NYSE. But when you buy that share of any company, Apple, whoever, doesn't matter, right? You're not buying that from that company. You're buying it from someone else or some other investment bank or investment institution typically, or index fund or what have you that owns that share. So now you and I are trading shares between each other and making money on those trades. Okay, that money never leaves. Very rarely does that money leave the system, right? So in an IPO, let's say Rich Hebron Inc. wants to IPO. Well, you'll get money directly from investors in the IPO, but after that, they will turn around and trade those shares to other people and make money on those trades, but you will see no more of that money. The only way you'll see that money is in as much as you can issue new shares at that price and then get some of that money, right? So it does create value in your company, but it doesn't inject value into the system, right?
Yeah.
It creates capital value that's held among a relatively few number of people in institutions, and usually it just circulates. It just changes hands. Like, when's the last time someone who's cashed out all their stocks and went out and like bought stuff with it, right?
No, I don't know anybody.
Yeah, like today people like park their money in the stock market and they watch it grow. Well, every dollar you park in the stock market and watch it grow, that's $1 that you have now taken out of the economy. And people are like, oh, it's for my retirement, I'll spend it one day. Honestly, though, if you look at like how wealth is being accumulated in this country, the reason that the baby boomers control, like, what is it, Rich, 60, 70% of the wealth in this country still, is because they don't do that. That's not what people do. Capital, money, has become an end in and of itself. So now people don't want to have money so that they can spend it on things they want or grow their companies. They just want to have it. And they like seeing that chart tick up and up and up and up and up. And so they never sell it and they never spend it, right? And what's happened now is that's taking money out of the system. So when you see like rising poverty, rising inequality, like, it's no wonder that these problems are happening, because we're leeching money out of our own system. We're leeching money out of the system, parking it in things like the stock market, and just horse trading between each other. And the people that control most of that money, that's like the top 1%. And so top 1% controls most of that wealth, and it just trades hands between the 1%. When's the last time a billionaire came to you and said, here's some shares of my company? No, they're trading it amongst themselves. And yes, you can say, well, people's pension funds invest in those things. Yeah, but pensions and 401ks today are pretty measly, and they get hit by high investment management fees, and those people are the 1%. Yeah. So now they're charging you from your money to try to make you more money. So again, it's derivative value, it's derived value. That's what secondary securities markets are. And, I think that this is the kind of big elephant in the room, if you will, about capitalism, is that capitalism as it exists today is really more about securities than capital.
That's a big idea.
Well, it's
That's
not original to me. I mean, Robert Reich, who is Clinton's Secretary of Commerce, has written about this. Maria Macuzzo, Italian academic. I forget how to pronounce her last name. Her book is called, I think, The Value of Everything. She's written about this. Like a lot of people have written about this, mostly Thomas Piketty, of course, in Capital, which is probably one of the best books on economics written in the last 50 years.
what is it?
Talks
What is
about
it
this.
called?
It's just called Capital, which is the title of Marx's book, right? So this is like his revisitation of Marxist doctrine in light of the data from the 21st century. And Thomas Piketty's point, and Piketty kind of really started this focus on wealth inequality, even among like the wealthy, right? People talk about wealth inequality in business circles now because of Thomas Piketty. People who are not wealthy have always talked about inequality, but the wealthy now talk about inequality
Yeah.
because of Thomas Piketty. And his book, he says, like, look, the problem with inequality isn't income inequality. It's not that,
It's wealth, right?
It's wealth inequality. And
Yeah.
people don't understand this. If you make 50 grand and a doctor next door makes 300, well, he's probably not next door, but the doctor down the block makes 300 grand. Like you can look at that and say, wow, that's what's causing inequality. That's not actually what's causing inequality. That doctor still works for his money, his or her money, right? What is causing inequality is passive wealth generation, where I have a $100 million and I stick it in the stock market or I stick it into private equity funds, and every year, right, I make 500,000, 600,000, maybe a million, maybe 10 million. Well, if I have 100 million, I'm probably making 20 or 30 million a year. And you know what I'm doing? You know what I'm doing for work? Nothing.
Yeah.
I'm not doing a darn thing. And now people will say, well, yeah, but those people are going out and spending more money. Yeah, but I'm spending money on yachts. And the guy who
Yeah.
owns the yacht company is also in my 1%.
So it's like having money generates more money.
Yes.
And that's the basic concept. So if
But passively. And the
passively,
key is
right.
passively, yes. Yeah. And it's
Or
the passive.
having it as a tool to then, or energy to just put towards something else, where if
Exactly.
you have like a set income, it's getting spent right away.
Yep.
And it's going to like very essential things, and you can't generate that extra energy or tools.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah, that's a fair analogy. And that's what's happening today. So capitalism today has become really about passive wealth generation, right? Exponentially generating wealth. It's not just I want $1 more for every dollar I put in. No, now investors expect 30 times, 3 times the dollars they put in, 30% IRR, crazy returns. So that's what capitalism has become. So you could say, I actually believe that we don't have a single capitalism in America. It does not have a single economy. It has a couple of economies, and they don't really interact, right? The top 1%, the economy in the top 1% kind of is a closed system. It's not entirely closed, right? But it is, because Warren Buffett still goes to McDonald's. But
he's pumping money right back into the system.
To like $5 a week, right?
Yeah.
But this is my point. Like people are like, oh, well, the billionaires the people who are worth a lot go out and spend money. The $5 they spend a day at McDonald's isn't going to make a difference. What's going to make a difference is the tens of billions they have locked up in passive wealth generating assets, right? Which for these guys includes like art, Birkin bags. The Hermes Birkin bag has outperformed the S&P.
What's a Birkin bag?
The Birkin bag, well, your female audience will know what a Birkin bag is. It's a handbag. It's a purse.
Okay.
It's by the luxury brand Hermes, and the price today. Let me see if I can get the spot price of a Birkin bag today. But typically it's going to be let's see, on the low end. They're all six figures, right? So it depends on the year and everything.
A handbag or like
it's just a handbag. It's a handbag that is some of them are worth like $400,000. And so here's the thing: the Birkin bag in price appreciation on average over the last decade has outperformed the S&P over the last 10 years. The S&P at 500 on average over the last 10 years has underperformed the Birkin bag. So if you got a lot of money, Birkin bag is a good place to park your money.
But if you're in this rarefied, say 1%, they just can decide what is valuable.
They create their own markets.
Yeah.
They create their own markets. And this is why I'm saying that there's two different economies. Most people cannot participate in that economy, right? Most people don't even know what the heck is happening in that economy. But that's the economy that is sucking up most of the wealth on the backs of working Americans. And let me tell you, what I just said sounds really Marxist.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what Marx would have said.
So then a lot of people are frustrated right now about inequality, and you have these big momentous things like the COVID-19 pandemic, and then the Black Lives Matter movement. There's a lot of energy and frustration right now, and a lot of it you hear like capitalism as this word. And so what can we do about the wealth inequality?
Well, I mean, just on COVID and the Black Lives Matter protests around the murder of George Floyd, that's a whole other topic. Have you talked about that on your show?
Yeah, a couple episodes ago I did.
But I mean, how many billionaires have you seen out there protesting, and how many billionaires you think are in the hospital right now? Well, first of all, there's not that many billionaires to begin with. But the point is that when these things happen, the wealthy, it doesn't really bother them because they have enough money to just do fine. Maybe they, take their private jet out to their yacht, and they're going to Bora Bora. No one goes to Bora Bora anymore. They're going to the Maldives. Nah, it's kind of passe now too. But they're off in the South Pacific.
That's a fad.
Yeah, that was a trend. Yeah, we were on somewhere else. There is I just found out about a new place the ultra wealthy are going. I can't remember the name of it. It'll come to me. But they're out there on their big yachts or kind of on their estates. They're not bothered by the pandemic, right? They don't have to be affected by it. They can have other people bring them anything they want, anytime they want. Most people still have to go out to the grocery store. So, or they have to go to work because they're in this essential industry and they need to put food on the table. Right. Or they get fired from their job, and in order to put food on the table, they have to use a counterfeit bill like George Floyd and then get murdered on the street by the people that are supposed to protect them. Right? Like that's what's happening to most Americans out there, while the ultra wealthy are just sitting pretty. Right. So they're totally unfazed by all of this. And look at the stock market. Unemployment is basically, adjusting for a lot of factors at close to like an all-time high, or, certainly since the Depression in this country. Yeah. Right. And the stock market is also at an all-time high. Yeah. There is something fundamentally wrong with that. But, the stock market loves it when people are getting fired because that's more profit to the bottom line in the short term. Yeah. Now, in the long term, there's no one left who has money to buy any of the goods or services from these companies, and then their profits will go down. But in the short term, it's a boost to profits.
So what can be done about it?
Well, the typical answer is just tax the heck out of the rich. This is Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren. Thomas Piketty thinks that we should raise the estate tax, right? So you can't pass $1 billion on your kid, right? Mm-hmm. Which, again, keeps the money in a very small pool of people. So the typical answer is let's go and get the government to take these people's money. Okay. I don't like that answer. And this is why, even though I agree with Democrats on what the problem is, I don't agree with them on their solution, which is why I'm still a Republican, because they just want the government to go out and take these people's money. What is the government going to do with it? I can't even get mail correctly here, right? I mean, it's like my water in my townhome right now in Houston, I have no water service because the government in their construction project down the street broke another water main. It's like the third one they've broken this year. The year's not even that old. We're not even halfway through the year. I don't trust the government. The government is out there killing black people on the streets. Cops are government employees. I don't trust the government to do anything with anybody's money. Okay? And people shouldn't either. The government is not a responsible steward of your money. They're going to take that money and they're probably going to just, enrich government employees. One of the reasons it's so hard to fire bad cops is because of the police unions, right? I mean, the governments and government employees protect their own. That's where the money's going to go. You take the money from the ultra wealthy and give it to the government, it's going to go nowhere. 80% of it is just going to get lost in the system before it actually gets distributed out to anybody. Or they're going to do something silly, like let's give everyone a $1,200 check to fight the pandemic. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. We should have taken that money and put it into finding a vaccine faster or rolling out more tests to every man, woman, and child in America, right? We could have paid for all those things with the measly $1,200 we sent out to people. And I get it. For some people, that's a lot of money. But they wouldn't need that check if we got the economy going again, right? So the government is not an efficient allocator of funds. So I don't want the government to take this money because they won't know what to do with it. The solution I see comes down to Joseph Schumpeter, creative destruction and entrepreneurship. And this is why I do what I do. I believe in the power of creative destruction, which is in capitalism, the notion that old things are constantly being destroyed and replaced with new things, right? And this is the famous economist, 20th century economist Joseph Schumpeter, in his book Capitalism, Socialism, and Democracy, where he actually concludes that capitalism might not survive. It might destroy itself for the very reasons we're seeing now, even though he was a capitalist. And he draws a lot from Marx and really respected Marx. But this idea of creative destruction is what capitalism is how capitalism is supposed to function. It doesn't function like that anymore because people are afraid to take risks. And people would rather park their money in some safe index fund than actually take risk with that money to create more net value. So we need to get back to an economy where creative destruction moves capitalism forward. And creative destruction is driven by the power of innovators and entrepreneurs, people who are willing to put their careers, their livelihoods, right? I mean, their pride on the line to create more net value by creating new things, by creating things that people want, by disrupting old things, right? The idea of disruption. Right. If we have an economy where the industries we have today are constantly being disrupted, that's how you churn wealth. Because the people that are up at the top making money on these systems today, the entrepreneurs will lay them low. Right. And people lament the fall of retail. But for a while, like the people who owned all these big retail companies, that was the 1%. Well, now Jeff Bezos is the 1%. So but Jeff Bezos now needs to be disrupted. We need to constantly be disrupting. I want people like Bezos, and he's not a great example because he is still innovating, right? But I want people at the top to quake in their boots every morning when they wake up that they're going to lose their wealth to some hotshot entrepreneur. If they feared that, they wouldn't park their money in an index fund. They'd put it back into the economy because that's the only way they're going to keep their status and power, right? But they're not afraid. They're not afraid of this. They'll just go out and buy the entrepreneur. They're going to find the people that they want and buy them for cheap. Right? So we need to get to an economy where we are actually catalyzing creative destruction. That's the only way that we're going to survive.
Is it part of it too that the fear of risk and innovation, a lot of people are dependent on jobs and wages, and whoever provides those jobs, that's who they're going to support. So then you have politicians that are lobbying. There's a lot of money that goes into politicians, both Republican and Democrats, because they'll promise Americans that they'll provide jobs. So they'll give tax breaks to all these major corporations and large organizations rather than the small guy, the people on the local level that are entrepreneurs and trying to disrupt things. They just give it back to the 1% in a way.
Yeah, totally. Absolutely. Well, and the academic term for that is like a political business cycle, which is like, kind of a theory that business cycles are driven by politics because like the business money goes into the politicians. And this absolutely happens. Politicians, aren't necessarily looking out for the best interests of their citizens. They're looking out for the best interests of their wealthiest citizens, right? And most influential citizens. But re-election. For re-election, to keep power. Everyone wants to keep power. Okay. No one, you don't see people out there giving away power. It's sad that statement is funny. It's funny because it's like it sounds absurd. It like literally sounds absurd. But I don't fault the politicians for doing that, right? People are going to always act in their own self-interest. What we have to do as a society, we have to change what is in their self-interest. And this is why individual citizens need to really educate themselves and understand how these systems work and how money really works and how politics really works. Because you see a lot of, especially young people, that are very politically active, but they're politically active in ways that actually don't benefit them, right? They're just following the herd. And one of the things that I'm really afraid of now, speaking of herd mentality, is all the people out there who are first-time investors on Robinhood, just like dumping all their stimulus checks into whatever the hot stock on Robinhood is, and then getting on like Instagram and saying, hey, I just made a quick grand, like follow me and check out my Robinhood portfolio and buy these stocks because you can make a quick $1,000. The retail investors, the average first time retail investor that drives up the price of that stock in the herd,
Hmm.
they're the first people. They're going to be the people that get burned when it comes down, right? So,
Hmm.
it's the herd mentality is very dangerous. It's important to think for yourself, educate yourself. Rich, you read a lot. It's like people need to be more like you and just like try to take their own destiny into their own hands and not be so reliant on other people and be a little more. And we've talked about this before, anti-fragile. So
Hmm.
if they did that, I think we'd be able to hold our politicians to account better.
Yeah, I love that. We're running out of time here, so if you could provide listeners with one last big idea or conclusion.
I guess my conclusion is that the system is fucked up, and the only solution is more creative destruction.
Are there some, like, maybe three books you would recommend to people to kind of get their minds going about some of these ideas? You mentioned
Um,
a
Yeah,
few
I mean, I
already,
think like
but
Capitalism, Socialism, Democracy by Schumpeter is like the classic. Most of it is like, again, pretty boring, unfortunately. I think a good, very readable synopsis might be Capitalism in America by Alan Greenspan. He acknowledge, he of course is very much a capitalist. He praises capitalism, but he also acknowledges it has problems, and he actually concludes that entrepreneurship is probably the best solution. So Capitalism America by Greenspan,
that's
that's
a
a newer
pretty
one.
pretty thorough one. I read that one.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's good, right? I mean, it's pretty
Yeah.
readable. It's pretty accessible.
Yeah.
And Capital by Thomas Piketty, if you are not faint of heart, um, because it is voluminous. It's quite lengthy. Is just now just a classic. The Value of Everything, I mentioned as well, is a good one. But anything like Challenges for the 21st Century by Peter Drucker. It's really more about businesses, but he touches on some of these issues. He's kind of the father of management science, but is very much a humanist, which I appreciate. All those are great. And so what we didn't talk about, Rich, and maybe this is another show, is how technology plays into this, because a lot of people would point to technology and say technology is actually a huge contributor to wealth inequality, and that is true. But
Mhm.
that's a whole nother topic.
Thanks for your time. That was a good
Uh,
discussion.
Thanks for letting me rant. And
It's what you're best at, Rev.
it actually is what I'm best at. So um, the that sounds kind of sad actually. But look, these are important issues, and people need to be talking about them, and having an open and honest discussion about them, and then figuring out how we can change the system. But I do think that entrepreneurship is the best answer, and so I just want to encourage all your listeners who are entrepreneurs, in any sense of that word. They're very important to the future of America and capitalism.
Thanks for listening to Rich Conversations. Again, you can follow Remington at Remington Tonar. Have an inspiring day, maybe even one that will lead you to blaze a new trail.